Again, it's such a joy and a delight to be able to be with you here in Clymer and at Church of the Resurrection. Father Jim, again, I want to offer a word of gratitude to you and to Father Philip, to Deacon Steve, who is with us, to the parish staff, and all of the wonderful parishioners, including also all of our ministers tonight, our cantors, our lector, our wonderful altar server, who John I first met when we had our All Souls Mass this past November. It's so great to have you back here, John, serving again for us. And it's wonderful to be back in Indiana County. As many of you know, I was in Indiana at St. Thomas More Parish when I was a deacon. And then I returned to Indiana County for my first pastorate at Church of the Good Shepherd in Kent, where I was there for 5 years. And you know, with no deference to the other three counties of the diocese, I always say, oh, I love Indiana County. I'd come back to Indiana County in a heartbeat. And so I did tonight. I also, my uncle, who is also my godfather, and also my second cousin. Now, figure that out. Sisters married first cousins in our family and was also my godfather. His first employment was here in Clymer. After graduating from IUP, he came here to teach high school and lived in Clymer for a year in 1965. And he always has such wonderful stories about that first year of teaching. But my uncle was also a very good basketball player. As a matter of fact, he was on Leechburg's championship team his senior year and went on to play basketball at IUP. And one of the reasons he got the teaching job, and you can imagine in the 60s that was hard to get a teaching job, especially right out of college, was because they also needed a basketball coach. And he loves to tell the story here in Clymer that on one of his first away games, they go down and all of the students and the athletes were there and they're standing by the bus. And as they're standing by the bus, my uncle's waiting there patiently, and finally a couple of the students said, Coach, when are we going to leave? And he said, well, as soon as the bus driver comes. And they said, Coach, you are the bus driver. They said, open the doors, the keys are on the seat. Boy, have times changed, haven't they? So he used to always say, for $5,800 a year, I taught, I coached, and I drove a bus. But I'm delighted to be with you tonight, and the theme this week, as we are in the third full week of our Lenten journey together, is Companions on the Journey. And as I have been going around the diocese, I have been taking opportunities to reflect on the previous Sunday or weekend's readings. And with this theme, Companions on the Journey, we might say to ourselves, well, if we're thinking about this past weekend's readings, how are we getting that theme about being companions on a journey? It doesn't seem, especially in the gospel where Jesus meets the woman of Samaria at the well, that there was much journeying going on. I was working today and finishing up, and Mr. Cliff Gorski, who helps us with the accent, will be very happy. I made sure I got my Easter message into him on time. And you'll read this little story in part of my Easter message, but when I was growing up, our next door neighbor had this very interesting little decorative plaque that hung in the breezeway between the side porch and her kitchen. And it had some flowers around it, but it said this, it said, do not walk in front of me, I may not follow. Don't walk behind me, I may not lead. Walk beside me and be my friend. And my dear brothers and sisters, this past weekend, as we heard the familiar story of the Samaritan woman at the well, we know that this year in our cycle of readings for the weekend, we are reading from cycle A of the 3-year liturgical cycle. And for the most part throughout this liturgical year, we're reading from St. Matthew's Gospel. And that certainly held true for the first 2 weekends of our Lenten journey, the story of the temptation of Jesus in the desert, and of course the Transfiguration. But this past weekend, and for the next 2 weekends, we're going to have a little diversion into St. John's Gospel. And we do that in the church's cycles. John is sort of inserted at different points of the liturgical year in each of those 3-year cycles, so that throughout those 3 years, we also get to hear St. John's Gospel. And as we move to St. John's Gospel, we know that St. John and his Gospel, being the last Gospel written under divine inspiration, and having seen and being very much aware of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John does a lot of theologizing. And he brings up points in his Gospel that sometimes differ from what we refer to as the synoptic Gospels of St. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This is very true today as we reflect on this past weekend's Gospel. Jesus goes into the region where the Samaritans are. And we have to remind ourselves that the Samaritans were people who had a lineage to the Israelites. And if you study the history of the Jewish people, we know that they are part of the people who were exiled. But then what happened is many of them, through the Assyrian occupation, often intermarried with non-Jews. And not only did they intermarry, but they also started to commingle not only some of the liturgical prescriptions of law, but also that of worship, also that of kosher. And so by the eyes of mainstream Judaism and the Jewish people, they were seen very much as being outcasts and people who were not in what we might say full communion with Jewish thought and customs. And the Jews looked upon them not only with great hesitation, but as we know, with great disdain, because they saw them as a people who had really acted in ways which separated them from what the Jewish people saw as the integrity of the true faith and the integrity of the practice of that faith. So we have this encounter of Jesus today, not only being in this area where the Samaritans are, but we find him at the well. And as this wonderful dialogue goes on, it's interesting, St. John reminds us that what time of the day is Jesus and the woman at the well? Noontime. And we see and recognize in that timing that it would have been very clear that most people would have gone to the well early in the morning. What was this woman doing at the well at noon? Did she have chronic insomnia and slept in? Was she busy about many other tasks and said, "Oh, I forgot the water"? No, it's clear that even within her own community, she did not have favor. She was an outcast. And so she goes to the well not only last, but she goes to the well alone. And we know that part of the Jewish custom of the time, and certainly the Samaritan custom as well, is that the well was also a great place where there would be conversation, where there would be dialogue, where there would be the getting of the latest news. Maybe like in a generation past, where that would be the beauty shop, or especially in communities like this, the post office, right? Or the supermarket, right? Or maybe in church after Mass, right? So this symbolizes that she's really cut off from the community. Jesus recognizes this. He knows this. And this Samaritan woman represents in the gospel humanity in its fragile, fallen state. And we're reminded that Jesus at the well is there. And he not only is communicating and talking with this woman, but then he does something that would be unfathomable. He asks her for a drink. A drink. I like to say, when we think about that, especially in a post-COVID world, can you imagine how, you have your own cup, you have your own container, you sterilize it 3 times, right? What he's really saying is, can I share your cup? Can you give me a drink? Now, can you imagine how the purification laws would be broken? How dare does Jesus even communicate with this woman, let alone share a common cup with her? And of course, the woman recognizes this and immediately goes on to say, how dare, how can you ask me, a Samaritan, for a drink? My dear friends, I'd like you to think about this. Jesus models for us, as our Holy Father so often uses the term accompaniment. He models for her accompaniment without any movement along any certain physical path. He accompanies her, joins her, and is a companion with her at the well. He is a companion with her not only in their relationship and discussion, but he teaches her the mercy and the love and the compassion of God. And I love the phrase. She says, you people, we worship on this mountain. You people worship in Jerusalem. And of course, what that's hearkening back to is that when the temple was being rebuilt in Jerusalem, the Samaritans actually wanted to help and contribute in the rebuilding of the temple. The Jews refused it because they believed not only their help physically or their contributions were impure, and nothing impure could go into the temple. So what did they do? Sounds like parishes, huh? Build our own church on this mountain. Good for you. I'm going down the road. There you go. But what does Jesus say? There will come a time when you will worship not on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. What's Jesus mean by that? What he means by that is there will come a time when we will see that the love of God heals all division, and that unity itself will not be seen just in a physical building or a geographical locality, but it will be in the person of Jesus Christ himself. We know that these gospel readings, especially this week, this coming week, and the 5th weekend of Lent, all prepare us for those who are receiving sacraments at Easter. The entire community is journeying with them. And so there's baptismal imagery. And this weekend, this past weekend, the water of the Samaritan woman at the well is a foretaste of the waters of baptism. Not only that quench the thirst, but purify, but also unite into one. And as Jesus is at that well, he is reminding us so importantly as Catholics, so importantly. This is such an important thing today in our world. What differentiates us? Why does it matter if we're Catholic or not? Doesn't everyone just pass go and go to heaven today, as we say? Well, then why be anything? Why we're Catholic is we believe that the sacraments divinely instituted by God, given to us in Christ and then given to the church, are the means in which God's grace is poured out upon us. Not only does it give us constant strength, but it leads us to salvation. That is why in this time of the Eucharistic revival, we're having our evenings of reflection in the context of Eucharistic adoration, the sacrament par excellence, Christ in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity. The gift of his very self. He is here with us tonight, just as he was with that woman at the well. And figuratively, we are with him, companions on the journey. We, like the woman of Samaria, are not moving far tonight. We're sitting with him, around him. We're listening to him. He is listening to us. He hears us. And just like that woman of Samaria, he knows everything she needs and everything in her life. I love that line, He says, the man you're living with is not your husband. I know he's not your husband, neither were the other 5. Huh? She says, wow, I've met someone who knows all things, But Jesus reminds her this well is a beautiful symbol of what will be, the living waters of baptism, which by Christ's death and glorious resurrection will save us all. My dear friends, what I would ask you to do, we are going to this weekend, believe it or not, reach the midway point already of our Lenten journey with Laetare weekend, symbolized by the rose color. We've reached the halfway point, and I always say, it's like, in the cars today, the light starts to blink, the indicator. And what it's saying is, we're halfway through Lent, we're halfway to Easter, but it's a wonderful time, and the sisters used to say this, when you hit the midway point, it reminds you of two things. If you're doing good with your Lenten observances, with your fasting, your prayer, your almsgiving, keep it up. If you're not, there's time to catch up. You can still make the grade. It's only mid-semester. But when we think about that, we think about what really gives us joy and causes us to give praise. That word laetare means to praise in the imperative plural. You, all of us, we praise, you praise, give praise. Is that Jesus gives us what we need. And in a world where we are so active, I think this weekend's gospel reminded us that Jesus is with us, and sometimes when we need that companionship the most is not when we're in the hurriedness of our lives walking from one point to another, but when is it? Sometimes when we're sitting there, pondering on our life. Which of those 5 was our husband? Why are you talking to me? Why am I worshiping on this mountain and you're worshiping in Jerusalem? Why do you really want me to give you a drink of water? How do you know all things? That's when Jesus is with us, and he is our companion. He is there. Sometimes through the power of the Holy Spirit to inspire us. Sometimes through that divine presence simply to console us. Sometimes in those moments when we are far from grace-filled by our actions or thoughts, to show us his mercy and forgive us. And sometimes to be with us when we are filled with joy and to smile and to be happy with us. My dear friends, you've probably seen, like I did this past week, some of those horrible national statistics, especially with young women. Young women 18 and younger. The statistics say 25% have either contemplated suicide or attempted it. 25%. Jesus is there. He is always there. The woman at the well opened her mind and opened her heart to receive him. That is what we must do, and that's what he wants us to do. Will we give him something to drink?